All right, so you can see the title there, and I guess that's not a very common word, and we'll talk more about why I have called it Anthood today. So not the last time I shared, but the time before, I think the message was called Insulted with a different spelling to the normal word insulted, all about having salt within us. I shared about how true followers and imitators of Christ won't actually be offended. They don't get angry, and they are able, by the Spirit of God and by the grace of God, to move around imperfect people, receive unfair treatment, and still manage to love our neighbor. And like their master, these people, they seek to be unoffendable. Now, I certainly haven't conquered that, but I do believe in the short time I've been practicing, trying to practice not being offendable, I found that there's a deep amount of peace. You don't have to worry about things and to analyze things so deeply because you've left it to God. You know, it kind of seems impossible. And some people would argue that it's unproductive to not be offended. But what Jesus said to his disciples in John 16 was that he had overcome the world. His way had defeated the enemy. And in the same discourse, back a couple of chapters, he promised certain troubles. Or actually at the end of John 16, he said, in this world you will have trouble. And he told them to take heart, but he promised them trouble, tragedy, trial. And he says then, Jesus says this remarkable thing. He says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. So he says, you're going to have trials and troubles. I've told you this so that through me you can have peace. The trials and troubles won't bring you peace, but Jesus can. He counseled them not to have troubled hearts in John 14. He says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. And then he continued on and talked about being connected to him, being our vine and branches soon after that. Can anyone truly experience peace while under trial? Can Christians, while surrounded by opposing forces and seemingly battling hard without measurable results, maintain their peace? There's a buzzword in education, and I think around the world at the moment. It's not just in the sphere of education where I work, but the word is mindset, and it can mean different things to different people. Whether you are a believer in God or a believer in the New Age or whatever, even if you're not a believer, mindset is significant these days, and it's talked about in psychology. But as educators, we talk about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And you can recognize the two when you're teaching and when you're trying to work with students and adults. The first, a fixed mindset, it kind of looks at the world as it is. It shapes the unknown using what is known. A fixed mindset says, I can't because I've never been able to. I've tried it. I know I can't. In Christian circles, maybe a fixed mindset sounds like this. Our experts have figured it out, so you don't go changing the recipe or messing with the status quo. Or maybe a fixed mindset sounds like, Pastor such and such is a man of God, and he knows better than you and I. These are common fixed mindsets that we'll come across in our faith journey. The other common mindset is well, it's not so common actually, but the one we're working towards is called the growth mindset. And a growth mindset looks at the world as it could be. It shapes the unknown using faith. Some people would say self-belief. I would argue with that. Hope, potential, and aspiration. And that's what a growth mindset adds. A growth mindset says, I can't yet, but I believe this is not the end of the story. In Christianity, or in Jesus speak, a growth mindset looks like this. With God, all things are possible. Or as Paul would say, that is why I take pleasure in in weaknesses and in the insults and hardships, persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul says he takes pleasure. He has peace during insults, hardships, persecutions and troubles and suffering. This is another level. And my understanding of prophecy tells me that times are going to get hard, and harder than they are now. And they're pretty hard. I would say the world we live in would be a very uncomfortable world for even those who lived 100 years ago, and especially 1,000 years ago. But Paul says that when he is weak, then he is strong. You know, when we are born again, we inherit this mindset, if you want to call it that, and it has to be inherited, because you don't have it from birth. I don't have it from birth. The only way that we can battle in this world like Paul did and view worldly losses as victories is the growth mindset, if you want to put it that way in the modern terms. I was in a teacher development class, a maths professional development session a few months ago, and there was something that the presenter said which really caught my ear. He was sort of spruiking his product and telling us why his product worked well with the students. And he said that all students get to work at their own level. And then he went on to explain that the ideal state, according to researchers these days, the ideal mental state that we want our learner, and this can be an adult or a student, but in my case it was 12-year-olds, the ideal state we want them in mathematics is what they call a productive struggle. And as soon as those words came out of his mouth on the screen, I was looking at a big screen, I thought to myself, productive struggle. Sounds familiar. And I wonder if it sounds familiar to you. Do you feel like sometimes your struggles in the present seem purposeless and you're not really sure if this is what God wants or why are things working out the way they are? I've spoken to people recently who said, God has abandoned me. In the struggle, sometimes it doesn't feel so productive. But in mathematical terms and in learning, apparently, the state you want your learner in is one of productive struggle. Well, how do you get the productive? When I heard it, as I said, it really sparked something in my mind. And when I say sparked something in my mind, I want you to remember that phrase later on, because it's not just an idiom, it's actually a factual statement that there was a spark in my mind. We'll get to that. But in one experiment, scientists actually took a bunch of 8-year-olds and they gave them a task and they gave them preparation and actually practice, 12 weeks of practice. It's a long time. And these 8-year-olds were given little mini beanbags, as you can see in the picture there. And they were told that they should toss their little beanbags, try and get it in the target from about 3 feet away. And so they were given their little target. A separate group, equal in size, instead were given the same beanbags and the same target, but instead of 3 feet away, they were given 2 separate targets that they could practice at different times. One was 2 feet away, one was 4 feet away. And I don't want to go into the 2 feet. I think there's a psychology there as well about achievability and so forth. But they took 12 weeks with these children to practice, these 8-year-olds. And at the end of the training, both groups were given a test. And the test only involved the 3-foot distance. So they were aiming at a 3-foot distance. And what they found was, categorically, it was quite pronounced. The children who had practiced on 2- and 4-foot targets, even though they'd never practiced on a 3-foot target, were much more accurate at throwing through a 3-foot target. And according to the research team, they believed that it was due to the achievability of one and the difficulty posed by the 4-foot target. Raising the bar seems to improve their outcomes. Another name for this developing science is desirable difficulty. We want people to have this tension between what they know and what they need to learn. We want them to feel like they're struggling a little bit. And researchers found that makes the brain more productive. Interestingly, and I'm not an expert on the human brain, but I've done a couple of courses, and it's a growing science. I would say what we knew 10 years ago isn't half of what we know now, according to science. And there are 3 key components of the human brain involved in learning: neurons, synapses, and myelin. The neurons are the nerve cells that have dendrites. I'll just go to my next picture here. The neurons are the nerve cells that have dendrites, and the dendrites receive other signals from other brain cells, from other neurons. And the axons are longer arms which send out signals to other brain cells, and they're electrochemical signals. And the way they do this is via what we call a synapse, this electrochemical synapse signal. Synapses are created when learning occurs and brain cells or neurons start to connect. And apparently the productive struggle or the desirable difficulty, it challenges these challenges that sort of stretch you beyond where you've been before. They actually improve in your brain the production of something called myelin. And it's a fatty layer. It covers these axons, these branches from the nerve cell, from the brain cell, the neuron, and it coats it in a protective layer and allows those synapses to fire more productively. And researchers found that a myelinated branch of the neuron, like an axon that has myelin wrapping around it thickly, has been measured to increase the speed of brain signals by up to 100 times. And how do you get the myelin? Productive struggle. Apparently, productive struggle, being pushed just beyond your limits. Have you ever been pushed just beyond your limits and found that you maybe grew? So what is the spiritual equivalent of the productive struggle? You know, if you look through the Bible, there's stories of men and women all the way through, personal stories. There's many generations of people in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and they reveal a pretty consistent truth. And here's what it is. Struggle produces strength. Stretching creates flexibility, extension. Obstacles develop character. Exercise builds capacity. And scripture is filled with accounts of people who have cruel opposition and thorns in the flesh and weaknesses and fears and failures. And in 2025, we can still look back in the Word and read all those stories and be strengthened today as they were strengthened back then. Challenged, but strengthened. It wrapped something around them which made them more resilient. It was a protective coating, and it allowed those synapses to fire a little more clearly, a little quicker. What's your story? What's my story with connecting, passing messages along, growing? Do I stand behind the barriers, maybe waiting for God to strike me with a bolt of brilliance? Do I avoid risk? Am I dodging difficulties to stay in my comfort zones? Or am I learning to live with a productive struggle, boldly, as Paul tells us? Are you living boldly where God tells you, step outside the traditional envelope of churchianity and break out, do something bold for me? Where are you at? You know, scientists involved in these productive struggle experiments found that just sticking to one faithful pathway, what you've always done before, maybe it's one task that you've always done before, one habit, one challenge, one job, one town, one method, it limits brain activity and brain growth. In fact, your brain can shrink because the brain, if it's not using something, it culls it. And all the dendrites and all the axons are removed. If you're not using it, you lose it. You know, if you are stuck in that rut, if you're not being challenged, not reaching out to God to give you that next challenge, it limits your potential and limits my potential to grow brighter. And I say brighter because Jesus encouraged us, let your light shine before men. In Matthew 5, you see there. And interestingly, when neurons fire and a synapse occurs between two brain cells, science has found that a tiny amount of light is produced inside your brain. And they can measure the firing of your synapses all around your brain. And so Jesus says, let your light shine. I joked about John and the light that was on him this morning, but it's true. There's a light that shines when you make connections, when you stretch yourself, when I challenge myself. Your mind is actually brighter when you're struggling. And you can see why earlier I said this productive struggle sparked an interest. It actually created a spark in my mind, a connection. This is a very common verse, and we've read it many times before, and I want you to read it again with me, but it says in Joshua 1:9, this faithful warrior of God, this leader of Israel says, have I not commanded you? Well, it's God actually speaking to him and then him passing the message on. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you... What? What's the next word? Go. And so the key word I think in the message today is go. Wherever you go. Go it's an action word. In the Bible we have lots of goes. Go to the mountain. Go to the lost sheep. Go to the furnace. Go to battle. The Lord your God will be with you on a condition. What's that condition? You have to go. And I don't know what that looks like for you. I don't know where God's leading you to go or wants to lead you to go. And I have to be listening for God's go for me. You know, being a disciple of Christ is a lot like sitting on my mountain bike. If I go into my shed and sit on my mountain bike and lift my feet onto the pedals, it's very difficult to get any forward motion. It's hard to balance. I don't get to see what I normally see, and I make no progress. Just by sitting on my bike doesn't make me a mountain biker. It doesn't give me the experience of mountain biking. But when I go, when I push off and I start moving, suddenly the stagnancy, the boredom, the imbalance disappears. And I can see beauty. I can experience things. I get the wind in my face. I get to be balanced. I can actually take my feet off the pedals or my hands off the handlebars if I choose, because I'm going and I've got progress. And once you've got that struggle going, you have balance. I've always avoided reading the book of Job. And last year, I kind of challenged myself, especially for my devotionals. I always found it quite miserable. There's a lot of conflict in there, and there's a lot of questions that I feel like I don't know how to answer, and I'm not really sure. And there's some people who have actually lost their faith over the book of Job. But when I was impressed to read it last year, I thought I'm going to read it through a little slower and prayerfully, and I really found it amazing. I've made some notes. But we're going to have some snapshots through the book of Job now, because if you ever wanted to see a man who had a productive struggle, it seemed unproductive at times, but a productive struggle, it's the man Job. And so let's look at this verse from Job chapter 12. It says, and Job is speaking here, he says, but now ask the beasts and they will teach you. and the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this, in whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind? Such a faithful statement there from Job. It's prophetic, actually, as we'll learn later on. He makes a statement about, if you want to learn about the magnificence of God, the hand of God, just look and listen. The animals are telling you. The birds are telling you. The fish are telling you. And so we're going to dig a little deeper into what they might be telling us today. The utterance of Job seems to, as I said, prophetically introduce God's booming and wonderful voice. When you get to the end, there's like 3 or 4 chapters, and God is just shouting out, well, not shouting, I guess he's speaking questions to Job, and they're all who questions, and he's demanding an answer from Job, and he's saying, who did this? Who can arrange that? Who's the one? And the answers, in my mind, are usually only a perfect and wonderful Almighty God. You know, in just 4 chapters, there are almost exactly 70 questions that God asks of Job. And many of these questions, if you've read it for yourself, you know this, relate to the creatures that God has created, these unique creatures which testify to his character and power. And as we saw in chapter 12, Job understood this to a certain degree, but the extent and the scope of it was way beyond. When God starts speaking, Job realizes that even his connection with God hasn't told him everything there is to know. You know, I wondered to myself, are there creatures in the Bible which God wants us to use as our pattern, as our model, to reference and say, we need to be like this animal? There's more than 100 animals referenced in the Bible. And so let's have a look at Job. There's some animals there. Lots of different cute, cuddly, maybe weird, ugly, underwater, flying in the sky animals that God has made. There's no limit to how beautiful they all are. But at the end of God's questions, Job speaks, and he kind of says, listen, you asked me to answer you, and here it goes, God. This is all I've got. And he doesn't speak anywhere near as long as God. He says, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Job says, I spoke, but it was nowhere near what I've learned from you, Father. You've made it clearer. Thank you. And he goes on to just say, I am just humbling myself before you. I'm worthless. Job's final answer to God is that he sees his own limitations, and he acknowledges this. He says, you're more merciful, you're more powerful, you're far beyond what I previously understood. And he repents in this humble state of adoration, and he acknowledges that he had a very narrow view. And at the end, he actually says these beautiful words. He says, I had heard about God, but now I see. Is that you? Is that me? Do we have a connection where we see clearly? What a beautiful testimony from Job here. A man who really was a faithful warrior of God. Most of us can probably think of a creature in the Bible. I'll go back to this photo here. Most of us can probably think of creatures that are mentioned in the Bible. Which ones are animals that are compared to us, though? I'm sure if you start to think through the Bible, there's one that sticks out, and it's sheep. About 212 times in the Bible, we are compared with sheep, and it's mostly in a negative or a derogatory sense. Not always, but we don't, the comparison is not a favorable one. And I was thinking, what other animals does God use as an exemplar, an animal we can emulate in our lives? Yes, we can soar on wings like eagles. I'm sure you thought of that one. We are to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But is there a creature that God would present as maybe a complete pattern for mankind? Maybe a lion, maybe bear, maybe a dragon or a whale. Actually, when I started looking, most often the animals that God compares us to and points us to are the birds. And we love the birds here on our property. They're here every morning. We saw the sunbirds around our room here again this morning, and we can hear the little red and black wrens that bounce around on the flowers. But birds are lifted up by God as an example for us to watch and to take note of. Looking in Proverbs, we see this, and it kind of is where I got my sermon title today. Solomon says, there are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. Maybe this is worth digging into a little bit. He says, the ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badgers are a feeble folk, yet they make their homes in the crags. The locusts have no king, yet they all advance in ranks. The spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. So you've probably guessed which one I'm going to talk about today. Maybe one day the Spirit will impress me to speak of the virtues of rock badgers or hyraxes as we know them today, locusts or spiders, but I'd like to look at the humble ant today. One of the smallest creatures, the humblest creatures on earth, ants. And let's see if we can find some of God's whispers in the dust where the ant dwells. I did some research, watched some amazing documentaries, and I was filled with awe. Science is still discovering things about ants and their makeup and how they communicate. But these tiny organisms are just amazing. They're unselfish, and they do things that humans can only dream of. On the surface of it, they kind of appear defeated, consigned to the underground. Ants are easily crushed by large mammals. They seem vulnerable to predators like birds and insects and spiders and amphibians and mammals and arthropods. And individually, they're an easy target. I'd say most of you have squished an ant with your foot or your finger before. They're quite vulnerable. And for an ant, just a small obstacle this big can stop their progress. And it seems to be something that's too big for them. And the extremes of nature can be very cruel to an ant, their homes and their resources. Many ants have a very short lifespan, and their roles are very limited. Their brains are quite tiny, and their reach is small. But I found that these ants have hidden strength. In their design and function, these are productive strugglers. The epitome of it, as I can see it in the animal world. In the book of Proverbs, there's the ant, an individual ant, probably an AI ant, but the one with the leaves is real, and we can see how intricately designed they are. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon says, I'm sure you're familiar with this, there's that word again, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which have no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, and gathers her food in the harvest. That word provides means brings together. So Solomon says, look at the ant. Go. Check it out. There's something you can learn there. You want to know productive struggle? Here's your example. Did you catch the word at the start though? Go, go. You know, let's just sit for a second and compare maybe your resume of achievements and skills and abilities with that of an ant, because you might be surprised to see what they're capable of. In the world, there's estimated to be around 20 quadrillion ants. And if you were to weigh all those ants, it would outweigh the biomass of all the birds and all the mammals combined. The ants weigh more. An ant can carry between 30 and 100 times its own weight. I watched this documentary, and it was obviously a worldly documentary, an evolution based documentary. And they said this amazing statement right in the middle when they were explaining how intricate their brains were and their bodies and how their stomach works and everything. It's the voiceover said, "The colony appears as though a master architect has designed it. Although this just isn't true, of course." And that was the exact words of the documentary. And I just sat there smiling, thinking, yeah, it appears that way because that's exactly what's happened. A master architect had designed it. I saw another video of this Brazilian disused ant colony underground, and what they decided to do was get a concrete truck, a cement truck, and tip concrete down the main holes, the main exits from the ant nest, just to study it. And then they got excavators in. Well, by the way, it took 12 tons of concrete. They didn't expect it to take one. And when they excavated, they had to go down about 8 meters. And if you get online and have a look, it's the most amazing, intricate, interwoven tunnels, and amazing to see where the ants live underneath the ground. Ants are one of the most successful life forms on the planet. They aerate the soil, they disperse seeds. They have thick skin, an exoskeleton, they call it. What about you? Start to compare yourself, maybe. Their antenna, beyond anything that's attached to our body, they're highly sensitive. They can detect dangers, or they can communicate with them. They can sense things that are just beyond most creatures. They have compound eyes, and these compound eyes measure the condition of the light, and they sense light in a very detailed way. These ants share their food regularly and readily through regurgitation. They have an amazing nervous system which not only keeps their body in harmony, but allows them to communicate wordlessly, and they are able to be unified in a whole colony of tens to hundreds of thousands of ants without a word. And the focus in ant design, and the video did use this word design. I kept thinking, yeah, it's designed. It has a designer. The focus of the design is collective efficiency. Collective efficiency. In other words, they only work well if they can work together. But a queen ant is the only source of life and perpetuity in the colony. Without a queen ant, there's no colony. There's worker ants. The young workers, they clean the nests and they nurse the larvae and they protect the tunnels. Some of the older workers leave the nest a little bit more and they start transporting waste and digging and guarding the nest. And the very oldest workers, their only job is to go out and seek food, forage for food and bring it back. And finally, there's drone ants, the other main category of ants. They have a very short lifespan. Their sole purpose is mating with the queen. They keep their wings, but they don't live very long. They have a very narrow purpose. Now, for us, I think our purpose is broader than ants. But I'm sure you've been doing the same comparison. Who's our queen ant? Who are the workers? The drones. Why do drones have big wings? Why do they have to make a big sacrifice of their life after mating? King Solomon says to us, go to the ants. What can we learn from going to the ants? Well, I wrote down some things that after considering her ways, as Solomon told me to do, I learned that ants are hardworking. Unity Ants are about unity, perseverance, discipline, and divine order. They don't have might, but have the right mindset. They're not known for their fame, but for their faithfulness. And they have precision without any pride. There's no planning. There's no hierarchical councils that they get involved in, committees. There's no boasting and there's no promotions in an ant colony. Ants show full obedience to the divine instincts of their creator. And the strength of an ant is not in its size or its muscles. It's in its togetherness. Ants are built to belong. Ants are known for building bridges for other ants to use. And it's very humbling. Ants carry their wounded back safely to home to heal them and look after them. They don't abandon the weak. They rescue, and they go on pilgrimages to find those who are injured. An ant's goal is not to survive, but to serve. They're the antithesis of individualism, I've found. They spend their summers preparing for their winter. We're still in the summer. Most of your countries still allow you to speak about Jesus. Not all of them, I know. It's hard in some countries, but we're still in the summer right now. We can fill up with the Word of God. We can fill up with a friendship with Jesus. And then in the winter, when times get tough, we can still have something to feed on. Ants keep finding a way, even when they meet an obstacle. Solomon says, "Consider her ways and be wise." What wisdom did we find there for God's last generation of servants? In Job 22, we find this interesting quote from one of his friends, actually. He says, "Now acquaint yourself with him," talking about God, "and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive, please, instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you'll be built up. You will remove iniquity from your tents. Then you will lay your gold in the dust and the gold of Ophir amongst the stones of the brooks. Yes, the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver, for then you will have your delight in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You will make your prayer to him. He will hear you and you will pay your vows." What a beautiful instruction there, even though his friends were a little bit critical and a little bit mistaken. If you read the last chapter of Job, God wouldn't actually count them innocent until they had fallen at Job's feet and said that you are righteous and we are not. And it wasn't until Job prayed for them that they were counted innocent and they were forgiven by God. Ants are teaching us from the dust. At the bottom of the barrel, where it seems like everything is hard, it's a struggle, everything's against you, you'll find gold dust. You'll find God dust, according to this scripture. Galatians 6:2, Paul says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." To me, that sounds like an ant bridge. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says, whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And I think to myself, that sounds like a drone ant flying to his death and extending the life of his colony. Jesus instructed me, and he instructed you, go. And I guess some questions follow that in your mind. In my mind, they do. Where? I guess he will tell you. How? It's not our business. When? As soon as he shows you. Why? Why should I go? You may never discover the answer to that question until we see Jesus' face one day. He just says go. When you go, if you look at this here, when you go, you're actually 2/3 of your way to God. Sorry, that's a bit of a teacher thing that I noticed. But go is in the word God. Maybe that's why Satan starts with Sat. I don't know. That's a little side note, but I ponder these weird things about words as a teacher. Once you go, you're still going to need obedience to Christ's other clear instructions. He didn't just say go. He said, ask, seek, knock. He said, come to me. He said, abide in me. In the Gospel of Luke, we find the disciples overwhelmed with how challenging, what a struggle their calling is. They're sitting back and Jesus is saying, you've got to keep forgiving. You've got to keep suffering. You've got to keep sacrificing. You need to live like an ant. And they hear it all and they say the following things. It just seems impossible. And they say this. And the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. In other words, we don't even believe this is possible. So the Lord said, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. And which of you having a servant ploughing or tending sheep will say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself, and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterwards you will eat and drink? Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. Jesus is saying, you're just doing what you've been told to do when you do these things. So likewise, he says, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say. And this is a hard one. It says, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. The wisdom from Jesus is, be like an ant. Just do your job. Do what's your duty. Go when I say go. Bring me something when I say bring me something. That's the basics, the very basics of being a follower of Jesus. And I hear Jesus saying, you know what, you're going to battle, my friends. It's humbling. There's no cheer squad lining the road. Go. Follow what you've seen my walk on earth has been like. It kind of looks a bit unprofitable. Died young, didn't really impress that many people. A lot of his followers forsook him. It looks unprofitable on the outside. It looks purposeless and futile, like the life of an ant. Jesus says, leave the results to me. When Jesus says go, many will find it hard. And like the rich young ruler, they won't necessarily go. We see in Matthew 19, Jesus said to him, if you want to be perfect, go, sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come follow me. We have a come and a go in there, but the go comes first. Go, he tells this man. You think you've got things worked out? Go and do something. And when Jesus said no, go, the rich young ruler said no. What will you say? What will I say? The Bible, it seems to be shockingly devoid of these awesome, successful, big planning, chest-beating heroes that we think they were. Instead, God chooses the least likely to be chosen, the broken and the humble. It's how he seems to accomplish the amazing. Go to the ants, God says. There are no superstar ants. These ants manage without ant managers. They know when to rest. They know when to battle. When one group stops foraging, another group steps straight in. There's no hierarchy, no checklist, no engineering blueprint. And no ant has the full big picture. And neither do you and I. Do I get on with the things God is placing before me each day? Can I obey the divine instincts that God gives me? Do the whispers of the dust turn to gold in my dawn to dusk adventures with God? I get the impression that when I read his word that God really enjoys making the remarkable things happen using the humble. And I wonder if it's because then everybody who's reading this story, everybody who sees this unfold, whether it's like Moses or Peter or Elijah, they realize this was a God thing. This wasn't a Moses thing. Elijah couldn't call fire down from heaven. He was weak. But when God said go, he went. God doesn't need super ants. It tells me that if anything amazing occurs in my life, in my service, in my family, and in my heart, it's apparent that it didn't happen because Ian is an amazing visionary or a wise leader. It happened because God will use anyone with a willing heart. Someone who was just satisfied to be an unprofitable servant in the hands of the master designer. I'm going to read you a short story and we'll finish up. It's written by a Christian author named Brant Hansen from a book I've read recently. And he recalls a time in his life, a single day when he experienced an epiphany. It's near the end of this long, chaotic, unpredictable day. Brant discovered something precious. And as I read this story, this encounter, this family journey, I hope you discover something precious too. He says that he finally got the kids buckled into the back seat of their car, into their baby seats and car seats, and they set off somewhere near Houston. And I'm going to read his account word for word. He says, "We had to stop by the grocery store, so I waited in the car with the kids while Carolyn jumped out, bought her stuff, and jumped back in. We drove around some more, through another neighborhood to drop something off at a friend's place. And then we had a couple more errands to run, people to visit, things to pick up. We finally pulled onto the I-59 South and drove for about 20 minutes in what I thought was a 65-mile-an-hour zone. But it wasn't, it was 55. I got pulled over by a Harris County officer and we all sat in the car until he came back with a much-deserved ticket. Eventually, we pulled off the shoulder and kept going until we turned into another interstate. That's when my daughter pulled her thumb out of her mouth and said something. Daddy, where are we going? Oh, yeah, he says. I should tell her. We're going to the big rodeo. We're going to see horses. Oh, okay, she said. That was it. That's all she said. But it dawned on me how odd this whole trip had been from her perspective, from the back seat in a child's seat. From the very outset, he'd just been sitting buckled in while we went here and there and everywhere. She just watched her mum run in and out and a strange man approach the car with a funny hat and flashing lights. And we turned this way and we turned that way and we picked up this and dropped off that and we sped up and we slowed down and we sped up again. And she had no idea where we were going. None. But she was okay with it. If that were me, I'd want to know right off the bat, where are we going? What are we doing? What's next? Why are we doing this? But she wasn't the least bit offended by my lack of communication. She's a child, and children are by nature humble. They don't have to know everything. She knew almost nothing. She didn't know the distance, the time. She didn't know the final destination, not even how long we would stay. She didn't even know the reason that she left her home. What she did know, though, was what mattered infinitely. It's the distinctive line between a life of mistrust, stress, exhaustion, anger, bitterness, and ceaseless striving on one hand, and the life of contentment and rest on the other. And not just for her, but for all of us who know that ultimately we're not in control. My daughter knew who was driving. She knew, and still knows, that the one who is driving loves her. And that makes all the difference. That's the end of the story. And I see this childlike, this ant-like faith. Like the ants, God's tiny prototypes, little patterns for humans, this child was just willing to go. They just got in the car and just followed her dad, followed her mum. Not because she knew she was like Tabitha and Jonathan and Jacob in the Bible. They didn't know, but they were willing to be unprofitable servants, to struggle productively, to go. Are you willing to go? Consider the ants. I want to play a song before I pray today at the end. And it's called I Will Go. And the words are very tiny, but just I guess if you listen, the words are quite clear, and I hope you enjoy. I guess a summary of what we've been talking about today. There's our girl in the back seat and the police car.